Hi, everyone who's joining. We're going to get started right at 2 o'clock, so just one more minute. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. This is the Adaptation Sciences FY 2023 competition information session. And this information session has a particular focus on the letter of intent phase. Alec, next slide, please. So I'm just going to go over a few webinar logistics. If you can hear me, you're already connected to the broadcast. You do not need to use the call-in option. If you hear any feedback and you've already connected via the phone, please hang up and just use your computer audio. If you have any questions throughout this session, please write it in the questions section, which should be on your toolbar, and we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. And a recording as of now will not be provided, but we will share the slides that we present on our funding opportunity webpage, which we will put the link to that in the chat. And we'll also update the frequently asked questions based on the questions that we get today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Vaughn.
Thanks, Amanda. I really appreciate it. Alec, if you could move to the next slide, that would be great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We appreciate your time and willingness and interested in our funding competition. My name is Lisa Vaughn and I lead our international programs within the International Adaptation Sciences program. Today we're going to be walking through our FY 2023 competition, and we'll begin by just a quick round of introductions of our Adaptation Sciences team members. And then we will walk step by step through the current funding competition, starting, however, with a little bit of background about the AdSci program. It is a relatively new program within the Climate Program Office. So we'll give you a little bit of background. And then we will, as I said, walk through the competition itself. And then we will wrap up with some specifics about the letter of intent process and the timeline, and then have a question and answer session toward the end of the hour. So first, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over actually back to you, Amanda, who opened this up today.
Sure. Hi, my name's Amanda Speciali. I work on the Adaptation Sciences team with a specific focus on water resources and challenges, as well as just adaptation sciences in general. And I'll pass it over to Andrea.
Hi everyone, Andrea Morales-Barboza. I'm a Canals Fellow sitting in the international branch of the Adaptation Sciences program. I'm happy to be here, and I'll pass it over to Alec.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex Shub, and I'm the coordinator for AdSci's International Blue Carbon Project. I'll pass it over to Bhaskar.
Hello, my name is Bhaskar. I am the program manager for AdSci, Coastal Resilience. I'm so glad to be here and to see a lot of people sign in. I'll pass it on to Grace.
Hi everyone, my name is Grace Roskar. I'm a research associate helping out with the Climate and Fisheries Adaptation Program, which is another program under the AdSci division. And I'll pass it to Jen.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen Dubkowski and I'm the program manager for the Climate and Fisheries Adaptation Program. It's nice to see everybody today.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off now as we walk through these slides because I'm teleworking today and our internet is not great. So let me go ahead and ask Alec if you would mind switching to the next slide. That would be great. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who may not be familiar with our program, the Adaptation Sciences Program sits in the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. NOAA's mission of science, service, and stewardship are the three pillars that support the agency's leadership in understanding and predicting changes in climate, weather, oceans, and coasts, and getting actionable and usable environmental information into the hands of decision makers. Next slide, if you would, Alec. So the Climate Program Office, which is where we all sit, is sits within one of the primary line offices within NOAA called the Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, or OAR. You often hear this line office referred to as NOAA Research. We work closely with partners in the other line offices in NOAA, as well as other agencies and researchers and stakeholders from both the public and private sector in the US and abroad. Next slide, if you would, Alec. So the Adaptation Sciences Program, or AdSci program, sits within the Climate and Societal Interactions Interdisciplinary Research Portfolio and Division. CSI-supported research seeks to generate the knowledge, tools, and institutional networks that enhance society's capacity to anticipate, plan for, and adapt to climate impacts. By supporting partnerships between scientists and stakeholders, CSI enhances the capacity of decision makers to effectively co-produce and utilize climate information in risk management, adaptation, and sustainable development. Our focus complements the work of the physical science research and development portfolio within NOAA by using insights from social science research to interpret, synthesize, and apply climate data analysis and observations. In very broad strokes, research activities supported by the CSI division and its programs focus on identifying and assessing risks and impacts, informing decision makers, and building capacity through partnerships and stakeholder engagement. Next slide, if you would, Alec. CSI has two primary programs, the Adaptation Sciences Program, which is our focus today, and the RESA program. These programs work together to improve climate resilience and preparedness in diverse socioeconomic regions and sectors throughout the US and abroad through knowledge generation, engagement, and partnerships. While both programs conduct interdisciplinary research at the intersection of communities and climate, done in close partnership with stakeholders, they contribute complementary but distinct capabilities to our division, the Climate Program Office, and NOAA more broadly. The Adaptation Science Program is composed of several lines of effort that reflect societal needs and opportunities for collaboration with partners, both within and external to NOAA. AdSci's current lines of effort include partnerships and research projects focused on climate impacts on fisheries and pathways for adaptation in fishing communities, or our CAFA program, which is where Jen and Grace are working. Water resources, challenges, and opportunities in coastal communities, which is where Bhaskar and Amanda are working. And finally, international collaboration to advance adaptation and resilience, which is where Alec, Andrea, and myself spend most of our time. And that is the focus of the FY23 funding competition that we are here to talk about today. Next slide, Alec. So just a little bit more background on the Adaptation Sciences Program. It's relatively new, as I mentioned, established with our first funding competition in 2021. But the program does build on previous sector-based programs that some of you might be familiar with, such as SARP, COCA, and IRAP. AdSci is designed to advance the knowledge, methods, and frameworks needed to move society beyond incremental adaptation toward more widespread, connective, adaptive pathways and resilient strategies with clear economic and societal co-benefits. The specific goals of the program are really to foster adaptation and resilience by supporting research and partnerships that focus on developing a better understanding of the key drivers and conditions that shape and enable, and at times hinder, adaptation across multiple temporal and spatial scales. Examples of these might include socioeconomic context, adaptive behaviors, risk perception, public awareness, and education. So getting a better understanding of the context within which climate change is occurring and within which we hope to use climate information to manage risk and make more sustainable decisions. And then the second element or goal of our AdSci program is to really identify key aspects and foster opportunities for using climate information to best support preparedness and planned adaptation that is also of high value to socio and economic goals. Next slide, please, Alec. So as I mentioned, within the AdSci program, we have an international element that works with partners in the US and abroad to address the program's broader goals. All right, next slide. So just a couple of words, additional words of context for this competition that might be helpful. International collaboration is really part of NOAA's DNA when it comes to climate. We have a long history of working with international partners to develop climate knowledge and information services and to foster the use of this information in decision-making in vulnerable sectors such as agriculture, water resources management, and public health and safety. This announcement is really intended to build on these partnerships and support new collaboration where appropriate. So as part of these efforts, I would mention that NOAA has established a partnership with the Department of State and other US government agencies to support adaptation and resilience in island nations. I'll note that some of the projects that will be supported through this competition may receive funding through this partnership. It's important to note that the process of applying is still the same, but I just wanted to highlight here as part of the context. And obviously, if applicants receive funding from the State Department, we will have a conversation with them about, any additional reporting requirements, so that type of thing. But this is a great opportunity we have to partner with State Department and other agencies in addressing coastal resilience in island regions. Lastly, I would just note that this funding opportunity was really shaped by and also is intended to contribute to the objectives laid out in the PREPARE action plan. For those of you who may not be familiar with PREPARE, PREPARE is the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, which was announced by the US government at COP26 in Glasgow. PREPARE is a broader, much bigger than NOAA, whole of government approach to working with country and international partners to foster adaptation and resilience in the face of a changing climate by addressing three primary pillars. They are focused on knowledge and information, plans and programs to mainstream and integrate adaptation, and mobilizing finance and private capital. I would encourage you to read the action plan as background if you're interested in learning more about PREPARE and kind of the broader context for this program. Let's see, next slide, if you would, Alec. So I'm now going to walk through the key elements of the competition. A lot of this is found and taken, really verbatim from the information sheet. And I will note here that the information sheet, the link is at the bottom of this slide. And that's a really important document that I encourage everyone who's considering applying to read pretty thoroughly. There is information in there that we really don't have time to go into today, so I want to make sure to flag that for your awareness. So essentially, with our FY23 competition, we are focusing on island resilience. We are soliciting proposals for interdisciplinary adaptation research activities to identify and better understand evolving climate risks, vulnerabilities, and adaptive capacity, and to foster the integration of this knowledge into adaptation and resilience planning for islands in the Caribbean and the Pacific. Within this context, we really encourage proposals to incorporate risks and solutions related to compound events and cascading impacts across sectors that have critical implications for systems. And we emphasize projects that would result in relevant and usable information that reflects the context for the use of this information, so the cultures, the economies, the existing networks and adaptive capacity, as well as the specific challenges faced by those islands, focused on climate impacts, vulnerabilities, and solutions. We'd also like to emphasize projects that advance the evaluation, identification, and strengthening of adaptive capacities of the institutions, communities, and sectors in these islands, and the integration of climate information in adaptation planning, action, and long-term resilience strategies. All right, next slide, if you would, Alec. So within this framework, we encourage research proposals to address one or more of the following topics. We would like proposals to consider identifying and contributing to the identification of evolving risks and vulnerabilities that come up as a result of the intersection of socioeconomic and climate stressors in the islands we're talking about here, and assess the adaptive related capacity within and across key sectors, including the food, energy, water nexus. We are interested in projects that evaluate, test, and/or scale up approaches to mitigating risk and advancing effective adaptation, including methods related to compound events and cascading impacts, nature-based solutions, climate information and early warning systems, and/or low carbon adaptation and resilience solutions. And finally, we encourage proposals that advance an understanding of key barriers and enabling conditions, such as some of those we mentioned earlier in the presentation, that would really influence adaptation and resilience in islands of the Caribbean and Pacific. And these we would anticipate would include participatory social science methods. I do want to note again that our program, as are others in CSI, is really interested in supporting interdisciplinary research activities, and we have a very strong interest in social sciences and actually bringing teams of interdisciplinary researchers and stakeholders together. So I just want to emphasize that element of this. We're not a physical science research program here. All right, next slide, if you would, Alec. So I won't read the list of countries here, but proposals should really focus on one or more islands within these regions. You will note that some of the US islands are also included here, but we are also focusing on a handful of islands outside of the United States as well. We really do encourage collaboration across islands, and that would include collaboration between non-US islands and then also with US islands here and territories and states. Proposals for this competition should be for 2-year projects or up to 2 years. You could submit something for 1 year with a budget of up to $150,000 a year. So the maximum total allowed would be $300,000 for the 2 years. Just a couple, no, next slide, please, Alec. Just a couple of notes, and these are articulated a little bit more thoroughly in the NOFO itself, and then also in the information sheet. But just to hit on a few highlights to kind of keep in mind as you're thinking about project concepts and partners. As I mentioned earlier, we'd like for all of these projects to include and be shaped by focused engagements with stakeholders. We, in an ideal world, would like to see them help kind of define the needs and the methodologies of the project and be engaged throughout. And then projects should also be conducted at scales where we can expand the availability and the use and the applicability of climate information where appropriate. Projects should really enhance and incorporate locally relevant knowledge. So think about the scale of your project. We want to make sure that this research actually winds up being useful to people at various spatial scales. So communities, states, regional scale is important. projects should advance the co-development of information, and we have included a list of potential topics or sectors or challenges: food security and sustainable food systems, water resources, public health and safety, infrastructure, disaster preparedness, nature-based solutions, and low carbon resilient strategies. So the scope of this is pretty broad, but we're thinking about the suite of challenges and impacts that occur in islands. So we are in particular looking for projects that would address at least one or more of these important topics. All projects should really incorporate principles of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And there is more about this topic in the information sheet, and I would encourage you to take a look. And then finally, I just wanted to note that just a reminder that this competition is really intended to support research activities as opposed to specific adaptation project implementation that might be done outside of a learning framework. However, if integrated into a research methodology, projects may include the coordination or development of trainings, workshops, peer-to-peer exchange opportunities that are focused on priority areas identified by your research partners and specifically by stakeholders. All right, next slide, Alec. So now getting a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of the application and the competition itself. We have some links, and as Amanda noted, we will definitely share this with you all following this presentation. We'll have them posted on our website. And I believe if you received an email kind of broadcast about this session, they should be embedded in that email. But the components you want to pay careful attention to are the following. One is the full announcement of opportunity, and this is on the climate program website. The second is this FY 2023 Adaptation Sciences information sheet. The third is the FAQ section of the NOFO website. So you can see in the screenshot here that there is a link you can click on that will take you to FAQs. And as noted, we will continue to update these through the process, particularly as kind of new questions are raised with one member of the team. And then finally, the Adaptation Sciences website has descriptions of all of our current kind of program elements. And then it also has links to the type of research that was supported by the programs that predated Adaptation Sciences. And that would include the SARP, COCA, and the IRAP program. Next, just talking a little bit about the difference between the federal funding opportunity and the information sheet. You're going to want to read both with a very careful eye for details. The FFO or the NOFO includes a lot of information about how you would go about submitting an application, the deadlines, the entire process, the review process, which we won't go into here today because we're really focusing on the letter of intent. But it also has very important details about what you need to have set up in order to apply for this program. There's something called a unique identification number, which takes the place of the old DUNS number that we used to use. And there is a financial system that applicants have to be registered to use. Sometimes that can take a few weeks to get set up. So if you're thinking about applying to the program, we really encourage you to jump into that NOFO, that FFO, and take a look at the eligibility requirements and make sure that you and your institution are set up to apply to the program. The information sheet, on the other hand, has points to those important documents, but it also has a little bit more about the context and a little bit more detail about what we're looking for in terms of the composition and the kind of focus of the program, the project, sorry, proposal. So the way that CPO runs these programs is we have kind of a multi-stage approach. We are focusing today on the letter of intent stage, but then following that, we have a part of the process that involves the provision of feedback from the program manager to the LOI applicants, or the people who submitted LOIs is probably a better way to put that. Then the application of the full submission of the application, the full proposals. Then we have review panels, And then finally, the program managers would make recommendations related to funding. So let's go a little bit more deeply into the LOI process. So Alec, if you could switch the slide. Thank you very much. So the LOI process is really described in greater detail on page 10 and 11 of the federal funding opportunity. And just to make super clear here, LOIs are really, really encouraged, but they are not required to submit a full proposal. Why do we have this process? Well, because we know that proposals take a lot of time and a lot of energy to develop, particularly when we are asking you to, work with people in your community, work with stakeholders, work across disciplines. So we want to make sure that applicants have an opportunity to kind of run ideas by the program staff and then get some feedback on the focus and the partners and the scope, for example, of a project. So it really is in the best interest of the applicant to submit a letter of intent. But once again, you could still submit a full proposal even if you skip that stage in the process. I will say that the letter of intent process is really the only way that we can provide any kind of response to, a written description of an idea, for example. So if you do have something on paper and you'd like to share it with us, please try to use the LOI process. So I already talked about the purpose. It really also kind of challenges the applicants to be able to articulate the goals of the project. We want to support the community and be able to put forth the best proposals we can to our review process. And we find that the letter of intent really kind of helps our researchers, and just as it would help us, really kind of develop a very sharp, concise way of describing the project. And then we really appreciate the opportunity to provide feedback. And so it's kind of an iterative process. So after the LOI is submitted, the program managers will review the letters of intent. And then within about 4 weeks, we'll provide written feedback via an email to the lead PI, to the person who submitted the LOI. In general, our responses are yes, we encourage you to submit a full proposal, or no, we really don't think this hits the mark, or this is for $1 million and we can't fund anything of that size at this point in time, so it's probably off mark. And then there's some proposals where we can say like, oh yeah, this is a great concept. You might consider reaching out to add someone with an economics background, that kind of thing. So, those are the three general comments that we would provide. But even those who receive a no, sorry, this isn't necessarily consistent with the objectives or the scope of the call, the funding call, you can still come back in and submit a full proposal. The LOI submission deadline is October 31st, 5 p.m. Eastern time. And apologies for those of you who are living in the States. I know that's Halloween and there's a lot going on that day, but we can't control when the NOFOs are actually posted. So that was the day, but maybe it makes it easier to remember. I don't know. Okay, Alec, next slide, please. So you'll be submitting the LOI via email to me as the Adaptation Science Competition Manager this year. My address is here. It's also in the NOFO and in the information sheet and on the website. As I mentioned, we'd like for you to provide a concise description of the proposed work and a statement regarding its relevance to the targeted competition. The LOI should be no more than 2 pages in length and should include the following topics. Really just, we only have one competition this year that was kind of standard language, and that's this one focused on island resilience. A tentative project title. You should list the names and the institutions of the lead PI and other principal investigators and partners. You should share a statement of the problem, and then a brief summary of the work to be completed, including the methodology used, data sets needed or to be collected, and an approximate cost for the project. So just to kind of highlight, no, next slide again, Alex, sorry. Just to kind of highlight the timeline review. The NOFO was published on October 3rd. Letters of intent are due 4 weeks later, so due October 31st. You will get feedback within 4 weeks. So by the end of November, you should have some feedback from us to your LOI. And then the full application submission deadline is January 31st. And I do want to point out that while letters of intent can be emailed, in order to submit a full application, applicants have to go through Grants Online. And that ties back into what I was suggesting earlier about getting into the NOFO and making sure that you're set up to submit an application through the proper channels. And that includes the Grant Online system. Then CPO would conduct the proposal review process and develop funding recommendations between February and August 21st, August 2023, and then projects would start in fall 2023, about a year from now. So that is an overview of the process and kind of the focus of this competition. And now we can, unless my colleagues want to add anything to that, now we can jump into the question and answer session.
Sure, Lisa, I'm going to go through some of the questions we've received so far in the chat, if that sounds good to you.
Sounds good, Andrea, thanks.
Sure, so someone asked if 2 universities from 2 different eligible regions can submit a joint proposal without involving any US-based universities. So
yes,
could that happen at that US institution? Okay.
Yep, that is possible. Yep. And I think, once again, just make sure that you read that NOFO and that you are set up to apply to the program and have everything in place to do so.
Thanks, Lisa. And then another question we have is more generally, I think, and there's a couple on these, so I'm going to try to see if I can combine them, but looking at whether universities and academic groups will be able to submit proposals, but similarly, we also got a question about whether for-profit enterprises could lead these proposals. So looking at those sorts of entities.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Yeah, so universities and academic groups can submit proposals, and then maybe, Anne, you can help me out here with the technicality of this question, but I believe that for-profit groups can submit proposals, but they cannot be used to benefit any particular, they can't be used for profit, and they can't be used to set up an organization to profit down the road. I think they still have to be for the public good. And I'm not sure if I'm articulating this correctly. And do you have a better way of describing it? I know the answer is that private companies can apply, but that there are some regulations about what the funding can be used for.
Hi, yes, there are some regulations. I don't have the text in front of me right now, but that would be something to consult with Fold about. If you leave me your email, I can consult with Fold, and then they can give a more stringent, specific answer. I can get back to you. But yes, for-profit organizations can apply, whether they're based in the US or international.
Thank you, Anne, I appreciate it.
All right, and moving on, sorry, I have some noises in the background. There's another question that just came in that says, developing an understanding of key drivers and conditions that shape and enable adaptation across multiple temporal and spatial scales is a tough statement to make sense of. Can you elaborate on what you mean by this?
Yeah, thanks. And I know it is a mouthful, isn't it? And so I was trying to look back through the NOFO today. That struck me as well. But I think what we're trying to think about here is, adaptation seems to be happening, I don't want to say in a piecemeal way, but in very discrete places to address very discrete problems. And so one of the things that we're interested in is how all of the different risks, vulnerabilities, and attempts at creating solutions for these are kind of coming into play and affecting each other. So looking at solutions that extend, or the potential for solutions that extend beyond, one sector, for example, and maybe multiple timescales, recognizing that while we are focused on climate timescales, and we are the Climate Program Office, there are a lot of challenges presented by weather. And so we're really looking to think about how, planning can occur across multiple timescales, both in terms of, the risk that we're confronting, and then also solutions that might be put in place over time.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think part of the answer too is if you look at the information sheet, I think we elaborate a little more there. I think looking at it right on the PowerPoint might be a little confusing at first, but I think we elaborate a little more on that. Another question we have regarding sort of what disciplinary backgrounds are encouraged to apply, because you mentioned physical sciences. So do you discourage, or does AdSci discourage physical science-based research applying to this competition, or can that be part of the proposal?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And as I mentioned, we're not a physical science research program. If there is an element of, of physical science research, observations, modeling, that contributes to the project, I think that's fine, but it shouldn't be the focus of the project. We really want to bring the social sciences into these projects, and we're really focused on adaptation and risk from a societal construct. So there's a lot of information out there now about the physical impacts of climate variability and change, and we're really more working in this space of how do you use the information that's available in adaptation and resilience planning.
Thanks, Lisa. And here we have another question about combining proposals. So this person asks, can proposals be combined with other proposals for other NOAA programs as part of this competition?
Okay, so that's a good question. I'm not really sure what that means, but I'm thinking that the question might be asking about, can you leverage other NOAA programs to support some of the work that would be proposed? I would just say here that if you are submitting to other programs, I think that's fine. You just have to be really clear in your proposal about current support that you're receiving from other programs. I can't remember, to be honest with you offhand, if you have to identify proposals that you have already into another program's competition. Maybe, Anne, you might know if the NOFO says something about that.
Hi, I actually did read through the NOFO, but I couldn't find any language about submitting the same project to multiple NOFOs.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Anne. As you can leverage other programs, and not just within NOAA, but other federal programs, but you really need to clearly identify those so that we can see how we're leveraging and making sure that, and I know people, don't do this very often, but we just want to make sure that we avoid the possibility of funding the same thing through different programs or different agencies. So you just have to be really clear about how the work that you're proposing is broken up so that one program in NOAA or another agency pays for one component of it, and this per project would be for something that is not currently funded.
Thanks, Lisa. And we have a couple of questions about regions. So I'm going to try to put those together. So there's one question that asks, the NOFO identifies the Caribbean as a region, but then lists islands. Is this opportunity limited to those specific islands we've listed, or are others in that region also candidates? For example, Turks and Caicos.
Yeah, no, it is actually limited to the islands that are identified in the NOFO.
Thanks. And then another one about regions. Can proposals focus on islands within only either region A or region B, or must they include, sorry, give me a second, or must they include islands in both? So is it both or one or the other, I guess is the question.
Yeah, no, it could include any of the islands, any combination. They're just grouped so that we could see kind of islands that are in the Caribbean region and then islands in the Pacific, but you can include one Caribbean and one Pacific if you wanted to.
Thanks, Lisa. And now there's more so a question about structure and sort of the looking forward at what this NOFO might do in the future. So will this NOFO be part of an ongoing program in which subsequent phases will be funded in subsequent grant calls, or is we sort of envisioning this as just an initial one-time sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think our work in the islands, and I'm saying we, meaning broader NOAA, will definitely continue. I couldn't say at this point if we have plans for out years beyond this particular funding competition in terms of, you know, having additional NOFOs focused on this particular topic. But I would say that NOAA plans to continue to partner with communities that are working the islands on these topics. But at this point, I'm sorry, I'm not sure where things will head in the future in terms of additional funding opportunities. It's not structured, however, assuming that we will have another one. I will say that. So projects are expected to, you know, have a beginning and have come to completion within 2 years.
Thanks, Lisa. And here's a question about what is actually needed to submit the LOI. So not the proposal once that's due, but the LOI. So do folks who are applying need a unique identifying number and the sort of the other information you mentioned to submit the LOI, or is that just for the proposal?
No, that's just for the proposal. So the LOI is, you know, basically a Word document that you're attaching to us via email with the components that are listed on that one slide and in the NOFO. So you don't have to include any of that information in the LOI.
Thanks, Lisa. And we've got a couple of questions on partnerships and what we mean by that. So I'll try to group those as well. So here's one that says, what typically, or what type of international partnerships are you looking for typically? So I guess what do these look like? What do they include?
I would say that, you know, we're very open to ideas and kind of groupings based on existing networks, but then also new partnerships and collaboration. We could see working, you know, with some regional organizations here, or even communities within an island, or groups that encompass multiple islands. So we're very open, and you know, really the types of partnerships would be defined by the applicants to the program. You know, our hope is that those would be responsive to, you know, the interests and the needs of their partners in the stakeholder community.
Thanks. And sort of connecting to that, some folks have asked if joint applications, so I'm assuming these more sort of partnership collaborative applications would be considered more competitive under this competition.
You know, I think that's a good question. We have not prioritized that explicitly in the NOFO. So I don't think that we would use that as, you know, one of the criteria by which the review panel would review the proposals. So if you take a look at the NOFO, toward the end, there's a discussion about the review process, and that might give you a little bit more insight to that. But essentially, and we won't, you know, this is more focused on the LOIs, but we give, you know, we share the information, the NOFO, the information sheet with the review panel, and then they review all of the proposals. We have not identified those that involve multiple countries, for example, as being a top priority. So it's more about the focus and kind of the overall consistently with the goals and the objectives laid out in the NOFO that we would be used to review them.
Thanks for that clarification, Lisa. Someone else is asking if the funding available for the competition would be able to support graduate students as part of the competition, part of the proposal.
Yeah, we can do that. That's often included in these proposals.
Great. And then similarly, another sort of what can be included or sort of a more logistics question. There's a question about how many awards are expected to be made at that 300K mark, or maybe a little more generally, how many awards are expected to be made?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the cap is 300,000 for 2-year projects. Not every application will go up to that amount. So it really depends on the number of proposals and the quality of the proposals we receive. Assuming that everyone, writes at least close to that amount and the proposals review well, probably between 11 and 13. But this is all depending on, the availability of funds that we receive in FY23.
Sure. And someone else is asking, what does competition name mean in the LOI? And I'm not sure what that refers to, but maybe that form that Bhaskar sent, or maybe you would know, Lisa or Anne, what competition name means. Is it maybe just the title of the competition we put out?
Yeah, it would just be the Adaptation Sciences competition name. Sometimes I think that language is in the NOFO from other from previous years where there were multiple competitions, but you would just identify Adaptation Sciences Island Resilience FY23 competition.
All right, and another, again, more logistical question, someone asking about funding and the years. So is that 150K per year max or 300K total for the whole project? So someone's asking essentially, can we have, say, 100K in year 1 and 200K in year 2, for example? Does it have to be distributed equally amongst both years?
So it doesn't have to be distributed equally, but you can ask for up to 150K per year. So by that definition, then you couldn't submit a proposal that had 100K in the first year and 200K in the second year.
Sure, that makes sense. And someone else is asking if the same institution can send in multiple applications, say if they have sort of different teams and different goals and island focuses, but it's all coming from the same institution. Is that allowed?
Yeah, definitely, yes.
Awesome. And then there's a question about if we have the materials available in Spanish, because some of the Caribbean is Spanish speaking, or are we providing any of these materials translated into Spanish?
That's a really good question. We don't generally translate this into other languages because the NOFO is a legally reviewed document. And so our review process isn't really set up then to review something in another language. But luckily, we do have a colleague on our team, Andrea, who might be able to help with at least some conversations and answering some questions in Spanish. And so if that is of any interest, and Andrea, if you're willing to do that, I would ask that you reach out to us directly and we'll see if we can set something up.
Yeah, I would be happy to. Bhaskar, if you could drop my email in the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. Feel free to reach out with any questions. We have another question. I'm not sure if we have an answer to this, but do we have any examples of the types of projects that have been funded before? I don't know if this refers to AdSci or AdSci International, but Lisa, I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, so Adaptation Sciences is a relatively new program, but we have some projects focused on flooding in coastal areas. They're domestic, so they look a little bit different than these might potentially. But if you look on our Adaptation Sciences website, you should be able to find links to the descriptions of the types of projects that were funded in fiscal year 21. I don't believe that the announcement is out yet for projects that were funded in fiscal year 22, but you can go even back a little bit earlier and look at projects that were funded under the SARP, COCA, and then our international program was called IRAP, the International Research Applications Project. And so but really kind of all three of those programs supported this type of work. So you could go back and look at SARP, COCA, or IRAP projects. And the way you would find those would be to go to the Adaptation Sciences website, which I think Bhaskar had dropped that or could drop that into the chat, and take a look under funded projects. You may have to do a little bit of digging to get back to the projects that were funded under SARP and COCA. But if you go to the kind of different pages of the Adaptation Sciences program that have similar focus. So like look at the coastal page for the SARP, look at the water page, coastal page for the COCA and the water page for the SARP, and then the international should have links to the old IRAP projects. Well, they're not that old, but to the previous IRAP projects.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm sure that'll be helpful. And for folks who maybe want to get some more information on the LOI process, will we be holding another information session? And if so, could you just provide some details on what that will likely be?
Yeah, so we will, and we haven't set a date yet, but if you'd like to get notification when that date is set, maybe Amanda, if you could drop I don't know if it's possible, but if you could drop the link to the Google form, where if you give us your name and your email address, we will send out an email letting you know when that session will be held. You can also look on the NOFO page, and I think, I don't have that open in front of me, but I think there is a link in the FAQ section. If you scroll down, there should be a link to how to sign up for that second full proposal session. And that will be sometime after, probably after December 1st.
Thanks, Lisa. And a couple of questions coming in now. So can you speak a little bit about how competitive applications to this program have been in the past? And maybe this is like a numbers question or a content question, but I'll defer to you.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest with you, I don't know what the rate of proposals funded is, but the competition is usually pretty, pretty intense. There are a lot of really smart people out there with a lot of good ideas, and climate is a complex problem that really requires teams, people working together. So competition is usually pretty tough for funding for these types of programs. And maybe you have an idea of kind of the numbers, the percentage of projects that are submitted that are actually funded for the program. I'm not sure about that.
That would depend on the competition. I would say I don't have a ton of experience with this, as I've only been here for 2 grant cycles, but I would say maybe less than half from my experience.
Okay. Thanks, Anne, that's helpful.
Yep, thanks, Lisa. And just a couple questions again on some of the more logistic parts of putting together the LOI. So questions about what level of detail should be maybe in the budget or the cost breakdown that's associated with the LOI, and is that included in the 2-page max length that is associated with the LOI?
Yeah, so really just an estimate of the budget. You don't have to go into great detail. It's just kind of to give us an idea of whether or not that project would be consistent with the funding profile that we have to work with. And we really do, for the LOI process, want to keep that to 2 pages. You do not need, nor do we want, a separate budget breakdown or title page, literally just 2 pages of a letter. That is obviously different when it comes to the full application, but for the LOI, just a ballpark, just an estimate of the total amount is good.
Super helpful. And then as far as timeline, when can folks expect to hear back from Noaa about LOI and the feedback that they're going to get on those?
Yeah, so they're due October 31st. We will start reviewing them as we get them. So really feel free to submit them earlier. But I will say we will not get back to people until the deadline has passed, no matter what. I would say we probably need about 2 to 3 weeks to go through these, depending on how many we have. And so you could expect to hear back by the end of November, very beginning of December on the LOI.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think here's an interesting question, especially because there's been a couple on where these projects and partners should be located. So does a proposing institution have to be located in the region of the project that they're proposing, or can they be somewhere else?
Oh, excuse me. No, they don't have to be in the region or the area of study, but proposals really need to demonstrate that they have existing partnerships or the groundwork for partnerships that can be really effectively developed and implemented within what is really a relatively short period of time when you think about it, 2 years. And proposals would need to demonstrate a really solid method for engaging and involving local, national, or regional institutions that will facilitate the work and ensure longer-term impact beyond the 2-year project. So, the short answer is no, you don't have to be part of the region. But the flip side of that is that reviewers will really be looking for ways to make sure that the applicant has kind of the tools, the networks, the knowledge, and the relationships in that particular place to do the work effectively.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in at this time. But we can give folks, we still have 7 minutes, I think, so we can let folks have a couple minutes to submit any more, but I think that's all we have for now.
Okay, that sounds good. So maybe give people a minute or two if there's any last questions, and you can really feel free to reach out to our team here. My email is in the documents, and we have a team of people here that are willing to answer questions. If you had specific questions that weren't answered here today, definitely reach out and we will update the FAQs on the website as well. So I think we can probably let people go and get 6 minutes of their day back. All right, well, thanks for those of you who stayed on till the end, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa.
Take care. Okay.